I never imagined my 41st birthday would end with a cold handshake and a severance agreement. That morning Ethan Carter, walked into the TechSync office in Austin, Texas, with a grin on my face. My colleagues had set up a chocolate cake and a handwritten birthday card, which I tucked carefully into my briefcase. The air buzzed with laughter and well wishes, as if everything was perfect. I was the data management specialist at TechSync, a rising tech company, and the system I'd built was the backbone of multi-million-dollar client contracts. But just a few hours later, James Holt, my boss, called me into the meeting room. "We can pay her half your salary," he laughed, leaning back in his chair, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "It's just business, Ethan, nothing personal." Her was Megan Brooks, the 24-year-old I'd spent 6 months training, someone I thought would be my right-hand assistant. Now she was set to replace me. I stood there, stunned, the birthday card in my briefcase suddenly feeling like a lead weight. James waved off my attempt to explain that Megan didn't grasp the system's complexities. "It's all in your documentation, right?" he said, his eyes flicking to his phone. I knew right then that this wasn't just about losing my job. Something shady was going on, and I wasn't going to let it slide without a fight. I left the meeting room, my head spinning. The TechSync office sat in the heart of Austin, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Congress Avenue. But today, everything seemed to blur. I'd been here for 3 years, pouring sweat and soul into building a data system that powered the company's biggest contracts. My system didn't just store information, it connected complex platforms, ensuring everything from transactions to reports was accurate to the last digit. When James hired Megan 6 months ago, I welcomed her. The workload was growing, and I thought an assistant would free me up to focus on major upgrades I'd been planning. I'd spent countless hours training her, walking her through the standard procedures, though there hadn't been time to dive into the deeper architecture, the invisible threads that held everything together. I figured we'd get there eventually. But now, on my birthday of all days, I was out of a job, replaced by the very person I'd mentored for 6 months. I tried to stay calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. "Megan doesn't understand the integration points or the system architecture," I said, my voice shaking slightly. James dismissed me with a wave. "It's all in your manuals, isn't it? Besides, young talent brings fresh perspectives." He demanded my keycard and passwords before I left. I glanced at Megan, standing awkwardly in the corner, her eyes full of guilt. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "I had no idea this was happening." I nodded, saying nothing, and handed her my system notebook. Just then a notification popped up on my computer screen. "Data sync error, manual resolution required." I started to explain, but James cut me off, ushering me toward the exit. "Megan's got this," he said firmly. I gave a tight smile. "Good luck," I said, meaning it more sincerely than they could ever know. Deep down, I knew that system wasn't as simple as they thought. As I packed up my desk, memories of my time at TechSync flooded back. I'd built this system from the ground up, transforming a clunky, outdated platform into a powerhouse that helped the company land major deals. I loved this job, loved the satisfaction of watching everything run smoothly, of knowing the data flowed exactly where it needed to go. But now, it was all being erased in a single morning. I walked out of the office, carrying both hurt and a quiet resolve. James and Megan might think they'd won, but I wasn't the type to roll over and give up. The weight of the birthday card in my briefcase seemed to grow heavier with every step. Just hours ago, my colleagues had gathered around, joking and clapping me on the back. Ryan Patel, one of the developers, had even slipped me a coffee gift card, though we'd never been particularly close. I'd always sensed a bit of tension with him, maybe because I was so focused on the system that I didn't make time for small talk. Now none of that mattered. I was out and Megan was in. As I drove home through Austin's bustling streets, the city's tech hub vibe, startups, food trucks and glass skyscrapers, felt oddly distant. I kept replaying James's words. "It's just business." But it didn't feel like business. It felt personal, like a betrayal not just of me, but of everything I'd built. Back at my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table, the birthday card open in front of me. The signatures and goofy messages from my team stung more than I expected. I'd been proud of my work, proud of the system that kept TechSync competitive. I'd spent years in data management, from small startups to big corporations, before landing at TechSync. This job was supposed to be my chance to make a real impact, and I had, until today. I thought about Megan, her apologetic whisper echoing in my mind. Was she in on this, or was she just a pawn in James's game? And James, what was his angle? He'd always pushed for streamlining, questioning why my processes couldn't be simpler. I'd explained, over and over, that the system's strength lay in its checks and balances. But he never seemed to get it, or maybe he didn't want to. As the Austin skyline glowed outside my window, I felt a spark of determination. Losing my job was one thing, but being discarded like I didn't matter, that was something else entirely. I didn't know what James was playing at, but I'd built that system from scratch, and I knew every inch of it. If there was something fishy going on, I'd find it. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 6 months ago, I thought I was at the peak of my career. The TechSync office in downtown Austin, Texas, was where I spent most of my days, hunched over a computer, ensuring the company's data system ran like a well-oiled machine. The office's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Congress Avenue, where traffic buzzed and the Texas sun blazed. I, Ethan Carter, 41 years old, was the data management specialist who'd turned a clunky, outdated system into the powerhouse behind TechSync's multi-million-dollar contracts. I loved this job. The thrill of everything clicking into place, the data flowing exactly where it needed to go, like a perfect symphony. But looking back on those months now, I realize I was too caught up in my work to see the signs of betrayal creeping in. When James Holt, my boss, brought Megan Brooks onto the team, I welcomed her. Megan, 24, fresh out of college with a computer science degree, was a breath of fresh air. She was smart, eager, but lacked real-world experience. James said she'd help me handle daily tasks, freeing me up to improve the system. It made sense. The workload was piling up, with clients demanding data accurate to the last digit. An assistant like Megan would let me focus on bigger things, like optimizing how the system linked global platforms. I started training Megan that first week. The TechSync office had a small corner near the coffee machine where we'd sit, and I'd walk her through how the system worked. This isn't just about storing data, I said, pointing to a screen full of charts. It's like a spider web. Everything's connected, and if one thread breaks, the whole thing can collapse. Megan nodded, scribbling notes, her eyes lighting up. She picked up the basics fast, mastering routine processes in a few weeks. I was proud, like a teacher watching a student grow. "How do you keep track of all this?" she asked once, as I showed her how to handle a sync error.
Experience.
I grinned, and a lot of coffee. But not everything went smoothly. James Holt, with his salt and pepper hair and confident drawl, kept butting into our training sessions. He came from a business background, not tech, and it showed in his questions. "Ethan, why do we need to run all these verification steps?" he asked during a meeting, his tone suggesting I was overcomplicating things. "It takes a whole hour," I explained patiently. "That hour prevents weeks of disaster recovery. This system's more fragile than you think." James nodded, but his eyes were blank. He didn't get it, or didn't want to. I told myself his business perspective could complement my technical expertise, but deep down, I felt a growing unease. Megan had her moments of impatience too. "Do we really need to check all these secondary tables?" she asked one day, when I had her run a verification sequence. "It slows everything down," I sighed. "Skip those, and a small error can spread, corrupting entire client datasets. Trust me, I've seen it happen." She nodded, but I sensed reluctance. I didn't blame her. She was young, eager to move fast, but I wondered if she truly grasped the stakes of what I was teaching her. Over the next few months, Megan and I became a solid team, or so I thought. I shared everything I knew about operations, from handling urgent errors to updating client reports. She started taking on daily tasks, giving me time to design new upgrades. I even wrote a detailed handbook, documenting every step for her reference. "You're like a walking encyclopedia," Megan said once, smiling. I laughed, feeling satisfied. I didn't know that handbook would become the tool James used to push me out, but there were signs I missed. James started holding private meetings with Megan, often stretching into the late afternoon. I assumed they were discussing her career development, maybe planning to give her more responsibilities. I even prepared extra training materials, anticipating she'd take on some of my routine tasks. But I didn't see that I was being sidelined. James also began questioning my documentation. "Ethan, you've got everything written down, right?" he asked during a meeting. "We need to make sure anyone can run this system." I nodded. "Of course it's all in the handbook." He smiled, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. I was also cut out of strategic meetings. Before, I'd always been invited to discuss big contracts or system upgrades. But lately, James told me to focus on technical work and let him handle the rest. I didn't think much of it, assuming he was trying to lighten my load. I was too busy improving the system and training Megan to realize I was being isolated. Then there was Ryan Patel, a developer on my team. He and I weren't close, probably because I was so focused on work, that I didn't make time for chit-chat. Once Ryan tried talking about football, but I brushed him off, my mind on code. After that, I felt a distance from him. "You're always so serious, man," he said once, half joking. I just smiled. This job doesn't leave room for slacking. I didn't know that distance would come back to haunt me, or that Ryan might play a bigger role in my story later. As my birthday approached, I had no suspicions. I still thought I was indispensable to TechSync. I'd built the system from scratch, and clients loved it. I was proud, not just of the work, but of the team I was leading, Megan, Ryan, and the other. But when I walked into the office that morning, with the chocolate cake and handwritten card, I had no idea everything was about to fall apart. James had been planning for months, and Megan, whether knowingly or not, was part of it. I was fired, replaced by the person I'd trained, and pushed out of the company I'd poured my heart into. When I left the office that day, I didn't just carry pain. I carried a question: why did James do this? What was he after? And how much did Megan know? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing: that system was mine, and no one understood it like I did. If James thought he could erase me without consequences, he was dead wrong. I'd find the truth, and when I did, he'd have to face the fallout. The morning after I was fired, I woke up to an empty feeling. My apartment in Austin, Texas, overlooking South Lamar, was usually bathed in the golden glow of Central Texas sunlight, but today, everything seemed cloaked in a dull haze. The birthday card from my colleagues sat on the kitchen counter, its scribbled signatures and cheerful messages now a bitter reminder of yesterday. Ethan Carter, 41 years old, had lost my job at TechSync, the tech company where I'd spent 3 years building a flawless data system that secured multi-million-dollar contracts. I'd thought I was indispensable, but James Holt, with his smug grin and just business tone, had proved me wrong. He replaced me with Megan Brooks, the 24-year-old I'd trained for 6 months, and kicked me out of the office on my birthday. I sat down with a cup of coffee, trying to shake off the sting of betrayal, but then my phone buzzed, cutting through my thoughts. It was Ryan Patel, a developer from my old team. "Ethan, I know you probably don't want to hear about work," he said, his voice tight with stress, "but the system's falling apart. The data sync error from yesterday still isn't fixed. Megan tried to handle it, but it's getting worse." I frowned, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. "What did she do?" Ryan sighed over the line. "She forced the system to run an override command, and now the client data's completely misaligned. I've tried everything in your handbook, but nothing's working." Ryan's words were like a spark in the fog. That system was my brainchild, designed with layers of safeguards to prevent exactly these kinds of errors. Every verification step, every line of code, was the result of hundreds of hours and 15 years of experience in the field. If Megan had overridden the commands, it could trigger a chain reaction, corrupting entire datasets from transaction reports to client records. "Don't override anything else," I said, my voice firm. "It'll destroy everything. Have you run the verification sequence on the secondary tables?" Ryan confirmed he'd tried, but it didn't help. "Megan said James told her to do it, but I know it's wrong." I closed my eyes, picturing the system crumbling piece by piece, like a building losing its foundation. "What did James say?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. Ryan hesitated. "He doesn't want us to call you. He said we have to handle it ourselves, that you're not an employee anymore." Those words hit like a punch to the chest. James, with his salt and pepper hair and cold stare, had fired me and now banned the team from asking for my help. Even as my system was imploding. A wave of anger surged through me, but I didn't let it spill out. "Just follow the handbook instructions," I told Ryan. "I'll think it over and call you back." As I hung up, I knew this wasn't a random error. James wasn't stupid. He'd done something deliberate, and I needed to find out what. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal cloud account, where I kept some old system backups. Not a violation of my severance agreement, just a cautious engineer's habit. I started reviewing the system logs I still had access to from before I was fired. What I found made my heart race. James had used his admin privileges to approve a series of optimization changes last week, bypassing critical verification steps I'd designed to protect the data. Worse, he'd backdated the approvals, making it look like they'd been in place for weeks, as if I'd implicitly agreed. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional sabotage. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling my blood boil. James didn't just want to replace me with Megan to cut costs. He wanted to prove that my system, with its complex safeguards, was unnecessary, that his simplified approach was better. He deliberately weakened the system, knowing it would collapse, to justify firing me. But he hadn't counted on me still having access to the data, or on me uncovering the truth. I needed more evidence to make sure he couldn't wriggle out of this. I texted Ryan, asking if he could share any details about what happened after I left. He replied quickly, sending me a screenshot from the internal system, showing errors spiking right after Megan executed the override command under James's orders. I don't think Megan knew what she was doing, Ryan texted. She looked panicked when the errors spread. I nodded at the screen. Megan might be a pawn in James's game, but I needed to hear it from her. That evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Megan. "Ethan, can I meet you?" she said, her voice trembling through the speaker. "I need to talk about what happened." I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop on 6th Street, a lively Austin strip with neon lights, live music, and the faint smell of beer in the air. When I arrived, Megan was already there, sitting in a corner, looking pale and anxious, her hands wrapped tightly around a latte. "Thanks for coming," she said, her eyes fixed on the table as if ashamed. "I haven't been able to sleep since it all went down." I crossed my arms, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Tell me, Megan, what's going on?" She took a deep breath, as if summoning every ounce of courage. "The system failure wasn't an accident," she began, her voice fading to a whisper. "James told me to make changes to simplify the verification process. He said you'd approve the idea, but we're too busy to implement it." I clenched my jaw, feeling like a knife was twisting in my chest. "I never approved any changes like that," I said, my voice taut. Megan nodded, her eyes welling up. "I realized that when things started going wrong. I told James we needed to call you right away, but he refused, saying it would prove your system was too complicated. He wanted me to fix it myself, but I didn't know how." She slid her phone across the table, showing me a string of texts from James sent Monday morning, right after I was fired. The first one read, "Don't call Ethan, just force the override. We'll handle it." Another followed, "If there's an issue, say it's a flaw in the old system. Don't mention me." My blood pounded in my ears, anger threatening to boil over. James hadn't just fired me. He'd deliberately sabotaged the system to push his agenda, planning to pin the blame on Megan if it backfired. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. Megan wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. "Because they're planning to throw me under the bus. Yesterday HR called me in, saying that they're investigating procedural violations I caused. James told them I made unauthorized changes without his order. I'm scared, Ethan. I don't want to lose my career over this." I looked at Megan, torn between anger and pity. She was young, inexperienced, and had been manipulated by James like a pawn on a chessboard. But she just handed me what I needed. Direct evidence of James's lie. "Send me all those texts," I said, my tone unyielding. "And any emails or notes related to the system changes." Megan nodded, her hands still trembling, as she forwarded the files. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," she whispered. "But I couldn't let them destroy everything you built." I nodded, saying nothing more. I didn't fully trust Megan's innocence, but I knew she wasn't the mastermind. Back at my apartment, I spent the night poring over the evidence. The system logs showed James approving unauthorized changes, bypassing critical verification steps, with clear timestamps. Megan's texts confirmed he'd directed her to execute the override, ignoring her warnings about the risks. He'd even tried to cover his tracks by blaming the old system, the system I'd designed and perfected. The picture was clear now. James wanted to eliminate me to save costs, sabotage the system to prove his simplification approach, and use Megan as a scapegoat when it failed. But he hadn't counted on me retaining data access, or on Megan turning against him. I knew I needed more to take James down. The logs and texts were a strong start, but I needed undeniable proof that neither James nor CEO Claire Donovan could dismiss. I remembered Ryan mentioning that all system changes were automatically stored on a secure compliance server to meet US data regulations. If I could access it, I'd have a complete history of James's actions, with timestamps and his digital signature. But I no longer had direct access. I needed Ryan. I called Ryan the next morning. "I need you to check the compliance server," I said, cutting to the chase. "Look for any changes approved by James in the last 2 weeks." Ryan hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm allowed, Ethan. If I get caught, I could lose my job." I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "Ryan, I know we haven't been close, but you know I didn't deserve this. James is destroying the system we built together. You want him to get away with it." There was a long pause. Then Ryan spoke, his voice low but resolute. "All right, I'll check. But if I get busted, you owe me a beer." I managed a small smile, sensing a shift in our dynamic. "2 beers, I said. A few hours later, Ryan sent me a compressed file containing the logs. They showed James using his admin override to bypass verification steps with clear timestamps and even attempting to backdate the approvals to cover his tracks. This was the silver bullet I needed. With the evidence in hand, I started planning. I didn't just want James to admit he was wrong. I wanted him to pay for betraying me and threatening Megan's career. I reached out to an old friend who worked at a U.S. data regulatory agency, explaining the situation without revealing sensitive details. If someone deliberately tampered with a tech company's data system, that could violate regulations, he said. Send me a report, and we'll look into it. I began drafting a detailed document, combining the system logs, Megan's texts, and my analysis of the unauthorized changes' impact. The report stretched to 10 pages, every detail meticulously organized, from timestamps to the effects on client data. But I knew I had to be careful. James and Claire Donovan weren't fools. They could try to cover up or pin the blame on me if I moved too soon. I decided to return to TechSync as a consultant, as James had begged me to do in a desperate call that morning. "Ethan, we need you," he said, his voice thick with anxiety. "The system's in freefall. Name your price." I smiled coldly over the phone. $300 an hour, minimum 40-hour contract, paid up front. James agreed instantly, no hesitation. "When can you start?" "1 hour," I replied, feeling like a gladiator stepping into the arena. When I walked back into the TechSync office, the air was thick with tension. Colleagues looked at me with a mix of relief and curiosity, as if I were a returning hero or a traitor. James hovered nearby, trying to mask his nervousness with a forced smile. Megan was absent. James said she was out sick with stress. I logged into the system with the admin credentials James provided and began assessing the damage. The errors were exactly as I'd predicted. Megan's override command had triggered a chain reaction, corrupting client data, from transaction reports to contract records. But I didn't just fix the error. I quietly copied more system logs, ensuring I had everything I needed to expose James. I worked all day, stabilizing critical systems and drafting a recovery plan. James checked in frequently, each time more relieved, as progress became evident. "You're a lifesaver, Ethan," he said, at the end of the day, clapping me on the shoulder like we were buddies. I didn't respond, just kept typing. His praise meant nothing. As I prepared to leave, I caught a glimpse of an email on James's laptop, left open on the desk. The subject: transition plan, after system stabilization. The preview text read, "Make sure everything's documented thoroughly this time, before we make personnel changes." A chill ran through me. They weren't planning to keep me. They just needed me to fix the system and document everything so Megan, or someone even cheaper, could take over. Then they'd cut me loose again. That moment solidified my resolve. I wasn't just fixing the system to help TechSync. I was setting a trap, and James would walk right into it. With every passing hour, my plan became clear. I'd repair the system, but not to save James. I'd use the system itself to expose his lies, ensuring he and Claire faced the consequences. I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for Megan, Ryan, and anyone else caught in TechSync's toxic culture. As I left the office that evening, a cold clarity settled over me. James had started this game, but I'd be the one to end it, and he'd never see it coming. As I left the TechSync office that evening, after my first day back as a consultant, a razor-sharp clarity settled over me, like the calm before a Texas storm. James Holt thought he could use me, bring me in to fix the data system, document everything, and then cast me aside again like a discarded tool. But he didn't know I held undeniable evidence. System logs proving his sabotage, text messages from Megan Brooks exposing his lies, and information from Ryan Patel backing it all up. I, Ethan Carter, wasn't just fighting to reclaim my dignity. I was fighting for justice, not only for myself, but for Megan, Ryan, and anyone else trapped in TechSync's toxic culture. The final confrontation was looming, and I'd make sure James and CEO Claire Donovan paid for what they'd done. That weekend, I worked tirelessly in my Austin, Texas apartment. Neon lights from the bars on South Lamar spilled through my window, mingling with the distant strum of guitars from 6th Street, but I barely noticed the city's pulse. On my desk sat my laptop, a cold cup of coffee, and a 10-page report detailing James's sabotage. The system logs showed he'd used his admin privileges to approve unauthorized changes, bypassing critical verification steps I'd designed to protect the data. He'd even backdated the approvals to cover his tracks, making it look like they'd been in place for weeks. Megan's text confirmed he'd ordered her to execute an override command, ignoring her warnings about the risks. My analysis outlined the fallout: corrupted client data, misaligned transaction reports, and potential violations of U.S. data regulations. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, and I'd make sure James couldn't deny it. I sat there, staring at the laptop screen, feeling my blood simmer. James didn't just want to replace me with Megan to cut costs. He wanted to prove my system, with its intricate safeguards, was unnecessary, that his simplified approach was superior. He'd intentionally weakened the system, knowing it would collapse, to justify firing me. But he hadn't counted on me retaining data access, on Megan turning against him, or on Ryan, a colleague I'd once kept at arm's length, becoming an ally. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. Anger wouldn't win this fight. Precision and strategy would be my weapons. I reached out again to my friend at the U.S. Data Regulatory Agency, who'd agreed to review my report. "If what you're saying is true," he said over the phone, his tone serious, "tampering with a tech company's data system could have severe consequences. Fines, investigations, even lawsuits from clients." I sent the report via encrypted email, promising to provide further evidence in person if needed. "You sure you want to take on your old company like this?" he asked, his voice dropping. I smiled coldly, though he couldn't see. "They chose this path. I'm just helping them reach the end." He chuckled softly. "Go for it. But be careful. People like that don't go down easy." I also texted Ryan, thanking him for providing the system logs from the secure server. "I'm not sure I should get in any deeper," Ryan replied, half joking. "But James needs to be exposed. He's wrecking everything you built." I sensed a shift in him, from a distant colleague, once annoyed by my seriousness, to an unexpected ally. "If this works out," I texted back, "I owe you more than 2 beers, maybe a full dinner at Salt Lick." Ryan laughed, referencing the famous BBQ joint outside Austin. "Just take down James first." I contacted Megan too, asking her to be ready to step up if needed, as a witness. "I'm scared, Ethan," she said over the phone, her voice trembling. "If I come forward, they could ruin my career." I took a breath, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Megan, you don't have to do this alone. I'll be there, and the evidence will speak for us. But if you don't stand up, James will keep manipulating others, like he did you." There was a long pause. Then she spoke, her voice small but resolute. "Okay, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I nodded at the screen, feeling a flicker of respect for her. Megan may have been manipulated, but she was choosing to stand on the right side. I spent all of Sunday finalizing the plan. I reviewed the report, ensuring every detail, from timestamps to analysis, was airtight. I backed up all evidence to an encrypted hard drive, in case TechSync tried accessing my laptop. I also prepared a concise 2-page summary for the meeting, designed to shock without losing focus. I pictured the boardroom, with James and Claire across from me, smug but unaware. I held the upper hand. I wondered if Claire knew about James's plan from the start, or if she'd merely seized the opportunity to hire me as a temporary consultant. Either way, she'd face the consequences too. Monday I woke at 6 a.m., feeling like a gladiator, gearing up for battle. I put on a gray suit, adjusted my tie, and checked the slim briefcase, containing my consulting invoice and report. Driving down Mopac Expressway, with Austin's glass skyscrapers gleaming in the Texas sun, my heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from excitement. Excitement at knowing that after today, James would never look at me with that condescending smirk again. I arrived at TechSync's office at 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes early. The office, with its glass walls overlooking Congress Avenue, was as bright as ever. But the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Colleagues glanced at me, with curious eyes, whispering as I passed the open plan desks. A few nodded, as if sensing something monumental was about to unfold. James had announced I'd join a meeting with him, Claire Donovan, and representatives from HR and legal, to finalize my consulting contract. But he didn't know I'd planned a far bigger surprise. Claire's assistant, a young woman, with a tense expression, led me to the boardroom on the 10th floor. The space was sleek and modern, with a long wooden table, black leather chair, and a large screen on the wall, exuding corporate power. James sat at one end, trying to project confidence, but I noticed his hand gripping his coffee mug tightly, betraying his unease. Claire, her blonde hair in a tight bun, and her eyes sharp, sat at the other end, radiating the authority of a seasoned CEO. 2 strangers, Patricia from HR and Jonathan from legal, sat across, flipping through documents with neutral expressions. "Ethan, thank you for coming," Claire began, her voice warm but rehearsed, like she was playing a role in a corporate drama. "Today, will formally conclude your consulting engagement. Patricia and Jonathan are here to finalize the paperwork and discuss any last details. I gave a faint smile, setting my briefcase on the table with a soft thud. How convenient, I said, my tone even but carrying a hint of edge. I've brought some documents that require legal review as well. Patricia and Jonathan exchanged glances, while James frowned, clearly caught off guard by my words. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door swung open. Ryan stepped in, wearing a navy dress shirt, his eyes steady with resolve. Behind him was Megan, pale but holding herself together, and two men in dark suits, carrying briefcases and exuding the unmistakable aura of government officials. Claire half rose from her seat, her voice sharp as a blade. What is this? This is an internal meeting. I sat down, maintaining my calm, and gestured for everyone to take their places. I've invited a few additional participants, I said, my voice steady but commanding. Ryan and Megan have first-hand knowledge relevant to our discussion. These gentlemen are from the U.S. Data Regulatory Agency. They're very interested in last week's events at TechSync. James's face drained of color, his coffee mug trembling so much that a few drops spilled onto the table. The regulatory agency, he stammered, his voice cracking. This is an internal matter, Ethan. You have no right. One of the agents, a tall man, with a stern gaze, cut him off. Deliberate interference with a tech company's data systems falls square within our jurisdiction, he said, his voice cold as steel. Mr. Carter contacted us with preliminary evidence of serious violations. We're here to verify. I opened my briefcase, pulling out neatly bound copies of my 10-page report and distributing them around the table. This is my final documentation, as requested, I said, sliding the original toward Claire. It details the TechSync data systems architecture, the unauthorized changes, approved by Mr. Holt, his attempts to cover them up, and the impact on client data. The final page is my signed statement, verifying all information. Claire clutched the report, her eyes flashing with anger. But she kept her voice composed. These are serious allegations, Mr. Carter. Are you certain about what you're doing? I met her gaze, unflinching. I'm certain. I've also accepted a position at DataCore, a TechSync competitor. Starting tomorrow, my first task is helping TechSync's clients transfer their data to a more stable platform. Claire's hand tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. You can't do that, she said, her voice low but sharp. Our clients are under contract. I cut her off, my tone as sharp as her. Contracts with guarantees of data integrity, which you've breached. My attorney has reviewed the relevant clauses, and clients are free to walk away if TechSync fails to deliver. The regulatory agents began asking questions, their voices cold and professional. Who approved the changes bypassing verification steps? One asked, staring at James. He stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It was a mistake. I didn't know it would cause issues. I shook my head, pointing to the report. The system logs show you used your admin override to approve the changes, with clear timestamps from last week. Your text to Megan also confirm you ordered her to force the override, despite her warnings about the risks. Megan, sitting beside me, nodded, her voice trembling but resolute. I tried to tell Mr. Holt we needed Ethan, but he refused. He said I had to handle it myself. Claire turned to James, her eyes like daggers. Is this true, James? He tried to deflect, his voice rising in panic. I was just trying to improve the system. Ethan made it too complicated, and I thought. The second agent cut him off, his tone icy. Mr. Holt, this report shows you backdated approvals to conceal your actions. That's not improvement, that's deliberate misconduct. James opened his mouth, but no words came out, his face flushing red, as if he might explode. Patricia and Jonathan, from HR and legal, exchanged worried glances, clearly unprepared for this. Claire tried to regain control, her voice firm but unable to hide the strain. We'll cooperate fully with any investigation, she said, addressing the agents. But I need time to review these allegations. The taller agent nodded, but his eyes didn't leave James. We'll need full system records and access to the secure server. We'll also contact affected clients. If their data was compromised, TechSync could face substantial fines and litigation. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and James's ragged breathing. Claire turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury, but tinged with helplessness. You've gone too far. You've gone too far, Ethan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked straight at her, unblinking. I did what I had to, Miss Donovan. You chose to fire me, sabotage the system, and pin the blame on others. I'm just bringing the truth to light. Claire's lips tightened, but she said nothing, her hand crumpling the report's edge. I stood, gathering my documents, and nodded to Ryan and Megan. My work here is done, I said, my voice calm but commanding. Ryan gave a slight smile, a look of respect I'd never seen before. Megan, still nervous, nodded in gratitude, as if a weight had lifted. As I walked out, I felt James's gaze, burning into my back, a mix of desperation and rage, but I didn't look back. He'd lost, and he knew it. The boardroom door closed behind me, with a soft click, like a period at the end of this chapter. In the days that followed, TechSync descended into chaos. Their biggest client, a tech conglomerate accounting for 30% of revenue, pulled their contract after receiving the regulatory agency's report. They switched to DataCore, where I'd start work the next day. Other clients followed, unwilling to stay with a company under investigation. A week later, I heard James had been fired. No official announcement, just whispers in the industry that he'd voluntarily resigned, under shareholder pressure. Claire clung to her CEO role, but the investigation and client losses were taking a toll. Rumors swirled that TechSync might be acquired. At a fraction of its former value. I began my new job at DataCore, in a corner office overlooking Mopac Expressway, where Austin's traffic hummed under the Texas sun. The senior data management role came with a higher salary than TechSync, but more importantly, it brought freedom. I'd negotiated with DataCore to bring Ryan and Megan onto my team. Ryan, now a friend, laughed when we met at a rainy street bar. I told you you owed me dinner, he said, raising a Lone Star beer. But damn, you took James down hard. Megan, still carrying some guilt, had regained her confidence. Thank you, Ethan, she said, her eyes sincere. I wouldn't have made it through without you. I took a sip of beer, smiling. We all deserved better. Now we've got a shot at it. Sitting in my new office, watching Austin's glass skyline shimmer, I reflected on what happened. I didn't call it revenge. It was justice, the natural consequence of James and TechSync undervaluing expertise, loyalty, and integrity. I'd built that system from nothing, and when they tried to erase me, I used it to turn the tables. Now with a new team, a role that fit my skills, and an open future, I knew I'd found true freedom. James and Claire could scramble with their schemes, but they'd never forget the cost of crossing me. 6 months after the fateful confrontation in TechSync's boardroom, I sat in my new office at DataCore, looking out over Mopac Expressway, where traffic hummed under the blazing Austin, Texas sun. The city's glass skyscrapers gleamed in the distance, reflecting the vibrant energy of a booming tech hub. I, Ethan Carter, was now a senior data management lead, heading a team that included Ryan Patel and Megan Brooks, people who'd stood by me in the fight for justice. The saga of TechSync, James Holt, and Claire Donovan felt like a chapter closed, but the lessons from it still echoed within me, shaping how I viewed work, people, and myself. Looking back, I realized it all began on my 41st birthday, when I walked into the TechSync office with a smile, unaware that hours later, I'd be fired. James, with his cold "it's just business" tone, replaced me with Megan, the woman I'd trained, and pushed me out of the company I'd spent 3 years building a flawless data system for. In that moment, it felt like my world had collapsed. The birthday card, with its scribbled signatures from colleagues, became a painful reminder of betrayal. But that moment also ignited a fire in me, a fire of resilience that drove me not just to reclaim what I'd lost, but to expose James's lies. The journey wasn't easy. I spent sleepless nights in my South Lamar apartment, poring over system logs, analyzing texts, and crafting a report to lay bare James's scheme. He didn't just want to replace me to save costs. He deliberately sabotaged the system to prove his simplified approach, planning to pin the blame on Megan when it failed. But he didn't expect me to retain data access, for Megan to reveal the truth, or for Ryan, a colleague I'd once kept at a distance, to become an ally. The final meeting, where I faced James and Claire with ironclad evidence, was the culmination of every effort. As the U.S. Data Regulatory Agency agents asked questions, and James stammered, unable to deflect, I knew I'd won, not through vengeance, but through justice. TechSync paid a steep price. Their biggest client, accounting for 30% of revenue, pulled their contract after receiving the regulatory report. Others followed, switching to DataCore, where I began building a new, even stronger system. James was fired, though the company masked it as a voluntary resignation under shareholder pressure. Claire clung to her CEO role, but the investigation and client losses were taking a toll. A small industry newsletter noted that TechSync was acquired by a larger competitor at a fraction of its former value. I didn't feel glee hearing that. For me, justice wasn't about watching others fall. It was about rising stronger from the ashes. My job at DataCore was a fresh start. My office, with its wide windows overlooking Mopac, symbolized the freedom I'd earned. I designed a new data system, incorporating lessons from TechSync about integrity, diligence, and the value of a team. What I was proudest of was bringing Ryan and Megan along. When negotiating with DataCore, I insisted they join my team, not just for their skills, but for the loyalty they'd shown. Ryan, who once bristled at my seriousness, was now a friend. We met at a bar on Rainy Street, where dim lights and the scent of Lone Star beer filled the air. "I told you you owed me dinner." Ryan laughed, raising his beers. "But damn, you took James down hard." I grinned, clinking my glass against his. We did it together, not just me. Megan had transformed, too. From a young woman, panicked by James's manipulation, she'd become a confident engineer, quick to learn and ready to tackle challenges. One day, she knocked on my office door, her eyes bright. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice sincere. "I wouldn't have made it through TechSync without you. You gave me a second chance." I smiled, nodding. "You earned it, Megan. We all did." Watching her walk away, I thought about my own journey, from the pain of betrayal to the pride of rebuilding my life. Sitting in my office, gazing at Austin's shimmering skyline, I reflected on the biggest lesson from this ordeal. Justice isn't revenge. It's the natural consequence of undervaluing expertise, loyalty, and integrity. James and Claire chose the wrong path, and their failure was their own doing. I didn't need to destroy TechSync. Their short-sightedness did that for them. My real victory was standing up, building a better future, and refusing to let injustice define me. I learned that your worth isn't what others think of you, but what you do when faced with adversity. I want to share this lesson with all of you watching my story. Whether you're facing unfairness at work, betrayal by colleagues, or feeling undervalued, remember you have the power to rise. Don't let anyone dim your worth. Protect your reputation, fight for what's right, and build the future you deserve. I did it, and so can you. Every step you take, no matter how small, is a step toward true freedom. Thank you all for sticking with my story until the end. Sharing this experience hasn't been easy, but knowing you're out there listening makes it worthwhile. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss our next story, and ring the bell to stay updated. You're the reason I keep sharing these tales of justice and resilience. Let's keep spreading these lessons together. I hope to see you in the next video.